The artillery shell that landed 15 meters from Captain Alina Vasquez's position sent crystalline debris raining down like deadly confetti, which she supposed was one way to celebrate 3 months of the worst interstellar conflict in human history. She pressed herself deeper into the crater that had become her temporary medical station, checking her supplies with the kind of grim efficiency that came from treating too many casualties with too little equipment. Medic to Alpha Base, Alina spoke into her comm unit, dodging another shower of alien crystal fragments. Sector 7 is clear of wounded, requesting immediate extraction before the Kitharan artillery decides to redecorate this entire grid square. The response crackled through static that suggested the communication relays were taking as much of a beating as everything else on Zirian 7. Copy, Medic 6. Extraction helicopter inbound, ETA 12 minutes. Hold position and prepare for dust-off. 12 minutes in an active artillery zone felt like requesting a leisurely picnic in the middle of a volcano. But Alina had learned that complaining about impossible situations was less productive than finding ways to survive them. She began packing her medical kit with practiced movements, cataloging supplies that would need restocking if she lived long enough to treat more casualties. The sound that made her pause wasn't another incoming shell or the distinctive whine of Kitharan energy weapons. It was something far more unsettling in a combat zone, the sound of a child crying. Alina froze, listening intently as another artillery barrage thundered in the distance. There it was again, a thin wailing that seemed to be coming from the ruins of what had once been some kind of settlement before the war turned this section of Zirian 7 into a moonscape of craters and twisted metal. "That's impossible," Alina muttered, checking her proximity sensors. The area had been declared clear of civilian populations weeks ago, evacuated before the first human forces landed. But the crying continued, weak and intermittent, definitely coming from the collapsed structures about 50 meters northeast of her position. Alina's training warred with her instincts as she stared in the direction of the sound. Military protocol was clear. Maintain position, wait for extraction, don't investigate potential traps. But her medical oath was even clearer about responding to those in need, regardless of species or circumstances. Medic 6 to Alpha Base, Alina said into her comm. "I'm detecting possible civilian presence in the ruins, requesting permission to investigate." The response was immediate and predictable. "Negative, Medic 6, maintain your position. Extraction is priority 1. Alina looked toward the ruined settlement, then at her packed medical kit, then made the kind of decision that would probably get her court-martialed if she lived long enough. "Copy, Alpha Base. Maintaining position." She switched off her comm unit and grabbed her emergency medical pack. The crying had stopped by the time Alina reached the edge of the settlement, which made her wonder if she'd imagined the whole thing. The ruins looked like most of the civilian areas the war had consumed. Buildings reduced to skeletal frameworks, scattered debris that might once have been furniture or personal belongings, and the peculiar way alien architecture collapsed that always reminded Alina of broken jewelry. Alina activated her biomedical scanner, sweeping for life signs among the wreckage. The device detected nothing for several seconds, then suddenly registered a faint signal coming from beneath what appeared to be a collapsed wall. The readings were definitely biological, but the pattern was unlike anything in Alina's medical database. "Well," Alina said to herself, "that's either a very confused piece of equipment or I'm about to meet my first alien civilian." She began clearing debris from the area where her scanner had detected the life signs, working as quietly as possible while keeping one eye on the horizon for incoming Kitharan forces. The settlement's crystalline construction made the rubble lighter than expected, but also sharp enough to slice through standard-issue gloves. The crying started again as Alina worked, closer now and definitely coming from beneath the collapsed wall. She could hear exhaustion in the sound, the kind of weakened distress that suggested whoever was trapped had been without food or water for some time. Alina's scanner showed the life signs growing stronger as she cleared more debris. When she finally created an opening large enough to see through, what she found made her forget every piece of military training she'd ever received. A child no bigger than a human toddler was huddled in a small space beneath the collapsed wall, protected by what appeared to be a makeshift shelter of crystal formations and metallic debris. The child's skin had a translucent quality that seemed to shift colors with each heartbeat, cycling through pale blues and soft greens in patterns Alina's brain tried to interpret as emotion or communication. Most striking were the child's eyes, large and multifaceted like cut gems, reflecting Alina's light in fractured rainbows. The child was definitely not human, but the expression of fear and hope on their face was universal enough that Alina felt her protective instincts kick in with overwhelming force. "Hey there, little one," Alina said softly, trying to project calm despite having no idea if the child could understand human speech. "I'm Alina. I'm here to help." The child's coloration shifted to brighter patterns when Alina spoke, and they extended one small hand toward her. Alina noticed that the child's fingers were longer than human proportions would suggest, and tipped with what looked like natural crystal formations rather than nails. Alina's medical training assessed the child's condition as she worked to widen the opening. Signs of dehydration were obvious, along with what appeared to be energy burns along the child's arms, probably from proximity to the weapon's fire that had destroyed the settlement. The child needed immediate medical attention, but Alina's supplies were designed for human physiology. "This is definitely not covered in the field manual," Alina muttered, pulling out her emergency water ration and offering it to the child. "But I guess we'll figure it out as we go." The child accepted the water gratefully, their coloration shifting to warmer patterns that Alina interpreted as relief or gratitude. As they drank, Alina became aware of something strange happening in her mind. Faint impressions that weren't her own thoughts began filtering through her consciousness. Fear, loneliness, gratitude, and underneath it all, a sense of trust that felt entirely unearned. "Are you telepathic?" Alina asked, more to herself than the child, "because that would explain why I suddenly feel like adopting an alien war orphan." The child's response came not in words, but in projected emotions that conveyed something like agreement mixed with hope. Alina realized she was experiencing some form of empathic communication, which raised fascinating questions about alien neurology that seemed entirely inappropriate to consider while sitting in an active combat zone. Alina's proximity alarms chose that moment to remind her that she was supposed to be at an extraction point, rather than conducting xenobiological research in a war zone. The sound of approaching aircraft mixed with the distinctive energy signatures of Kitharan ground forces, creating a tactical situation that could charitably be described as completely hopeless. "Okay, kid," Alina said, carefully lifting the alien child from their hiding place. "I hope you're ready for the worst field trip in the history of interspecies relations, because we're about to find out if humans and your people can run away from the same things." The child weighed almost nothing in Alina's arms, but their empathic projections provided a constant stream of emotional feedback that let Alina know exactly how terrified they both should be. The approaching Kitharan forces registered as predatory hostility in the child's mental projections, along with concepts Alina interpreted as hunters and death-bringers. Alina activated her emergency beacon and began moving toward what she hoped was still a safe extraction point, carrying an alien child whose continued existence had somehow become more important to her than following military orders. The sound of energy weapons grew closer, mixing with the child's telepathic projections of fear and the increasingly distant sound of human aircraft. "Next time I complain about boring medical assignments," Alina said, adjusting her grip on the child while checking her route for potential cover, Somebody please remind me that interesting usually means people are trying to kill you. Alina's plan to reach the extraction point lasted exactly 47 seconds before a Kithaeron hunter-killer dropped out of the perpetual storm clouds and began systematically destroying everything within a 2-kilometer radius. The mechanical beast moved like a predatory insect crossed with a tank, its multiple weapon systems tracking targets with the kind of efficiency that made Alina remember why humanity was losing this war. "Change of plans, kid," Alina said to the alien child, whose coloration had shifted to deep purples and grays that she was learning to interpret as extreme fear. "We're going to try the scenic route, which in this case means anywhere those things aren't shooting." The child's empathic projections carried concepts Alina's mind struggled to translate. Images of the hunter-killers methodically destroying settlements, emotional echoes of families scattered by the machines, and underneath it all, a kind of species-wide trauma that suggested the child's people had been targeted specifically rather than caught in crossfire. Alina dove for cover behind an outcropping of crystalline rock as energy beams carved the landscape around them. The child's weight in her arms seemed to fluctuate, and Alina realized with fascination that shouldn't have been appropriate during a firefight that the alien physiology was somehow adjusting to their movement, becoming lighter during jumps and more stable during rapid direction changes. "That's either the most useful evolutionary adaptation I've ever seen," Alina said, "or you're defying several laws of physics that I thought were pretty well established." The child's response came as projected amusement mixed with the kind of patient explanation Alina associated with smart children talking to confused adults. Through the empathic link, Alina received impressions of crystalline internal structures that could shift density and mass distribution in response to external forces. The child's people were literally built for survival in unstable environments. Alina's proximity sensors screamed warnings as 3 more hunter-killers converged on their position. The machines moved with coordinated intelligence that suggested they weren't just hunting randomly, but actively tracking specific targets. Alina was beginning to suspect that the child she'd rescued was considerably more important than a randomly displaced civilian. "I don't suppose you'd like to explain why half the Kithaeron military seems personally invested in your current health status," Alina said, changing direction as energy beams turned their previous cover into molten slag. The empathic response carried concepts of gift danger, mind touch, and something that might have translated as forbidden knowledge. Alina realized that the child's telepathic abilities weren't just unusual in their species, but represented something the Kithaerons considered threatening enough to justify dedicated hunting parties. Alina's tactical training kicked in as she assessed their situation. 3 hunter-killers, unknown number of ground forces, no backup coming, and responsibility for a telepathic alien child whose survival apparently mattered enough to justify a military operation. The smart move would be to find somewhere to hide and wait for the Kithaerons to move on to easier targets. The problem was that the child's telepathic projections were making it clear that hiding wasn't an option. The machines could track telepathic signatures, and the child's fear was making their mental emissions stronger and more detectable. Alina needed to either get far enough away to break the tracking range, or find a way to mask the child's telepathic signature. "How do you turn off telepathy?" Alina asked, knowing the question was probably meaningless to someone who'd been telepathic their entire life. "Because right now your brain is basically a beacon that says, 'Shoot here,' in several different languages." The child's empathic response carried confusion and distress, along with the concept that asking them to stop being telepathic was like asking Alina to stop breathing. But underneath the distress, Alina sensed something else. The child was trying to teach her something through the mental link. Alina felt a strange sensation as the child's telepathic projections changed from simple emotional sharing to something more complex. Instead of just receiving the child's thoughts and feelings, Alina began to sense the broader telepathic environment around them. The hunter-killers registered as mechanical voids in the telepathic landscape, dead zones that moved with predatory purpose. But there were other presences too, faint and distant, that felt like the child's people hiding in various locations across the battlefield. "You're showing me the telepathic network," Alina said, understanding flooding through her. "Your people are all connected, and you can sense where everyone is." The child's confirmation came with additional concepts that made Alina's tactical situation assessment. Alina's first attempt at explaining telepathic battlefield intelligence to Sergeant Torres involved a lot of hand gesturing, and the kind of vocabulary that would have gotten her written up under normal circumstances. Unfortunately, normal circumstances had stopped applying the moment she decided to rescue an alien child who could read minds and coordinate military operations through empathic projection. "Let me get this straight, Doc," Torres said, crouched behind cover, while Kitharan energy weapons turned the landscape around them into abstract art. "You're telling me the kid you found can sense where the enemy units are positioned, and you want me to base tactical decisions on alien psychic powers?" "When you put it that way, it sounds crazy," Alina admitted, adjusting her grip on the child whose coloration had shifted to patterns she was learning to recognize as concentration mixed with determination. "But the alternative is walking blind into positions the Kitharans have had hours to prepare, so I'm voting for crazy." The child's empathic projections carried Alina's tactical assessment to the other members of her unit, through a mental network that felt like having a very sophisticated GPS system installed directly in her brain. Through the telepathic link, Alina could sense Tor's skepticism warring with his recognition that their normal approach to this situation would probably get everyone killed. "The kid says there are 7 hunter-killers in a semicircle about 800 meters northeast of here," Alina translated from the empathic data flowing through the mental connection. "Ground troops are moving to flank us from the south, and there's some kind of command unit coordinating the whole operation from a position on the ridge to our west." Torres looked at Alina, then at the alien child whose large eyes seemed to be tracking invisible movements across the battlefield, then back at Alina with the expression of someone reconsidering several life choices. "Doc, I've seen a lot of weird things since this war started," Torres said, "but taking tactical advice from something that weighs less than my field pack is definitely a new one." The child's empathic response carried what Alina interpreted as indignation mixed with the kind of patient superiority that suggested they were considerably more intelligent than their size implied. Through the telepathic link came concepts of advanced mathematics, strategic planning, and what felt like mild offense at being underestimated based on physical appearance. "I think you just insulted a tactical genius," Alina said to Torres. "And judging by the data I'm getting, this something has a better understanding of enemy positions and movement patterns than our entire intelligence division." Alina's comm unit crackled with reports from other units engaged across the sector, painting a picture of coordinated Kitharan advances that were systematically overwhelming human positions. The war was going exactly as badly as the telepathic network suggested, with human forces responding to attacks they couldn't predict and enemy movements they couldn't track. "The Kitharans have been fighting telepathic species for centuries," Alina said, pieces of the larger conflict becoming clear through the child's empathic projections. "They know how to counter telepathic coordination, but they're not prepared for hybrid human telepathic tactics because that's never existed before." Torres considered this while energy beams carved new patterns in the crystalline landscape around their position. Alina could sense his growing acceptance through the child's expanded telepathic network, along with something that felt like tactical excitement as he began to understand the advantages their unlikely partnership might provide. "All right, Doc," Torres said. "Let's see what your little friend can do, but if this gets us all killed, I'm blaming you in my after-action report." The child's empathic projections shifted to patterns Alina recognized as anticipation and determination, along with complex tactical concepts that translated into her consciousness as fully formed battle plans. Through the telepathic link, Alina received detailed information about enemy positions, movement vectors, and what appeared to be predictive analysis of Kithaeron tactical responses. "They're planning to converge on our position in approximately 4 minutes," Alina translated. "But if we move northeast along the crystal formations, we can avoid their primary search pattern and get behind their command position." Torres activated his tactical display and began plotting the route Alina described, cross-referencing it with standard military doctrine and his own combat experience. Alina could sense through the telepathic network that the child was also analyzing Tor's military knowledge, creating tactical plans that combined human warfare techniques with telepathic intelligence gathering. "The kid's learning from us as much as we're learning from them," Alina realized. "This isn't just about getting information from a telepathic source. We're creating a new kind of military coordination that combines human tactical training with alien intelligence capabilities." Alina's unit began moving through the battlefield with precision that felt almost supernatural, guided by telepathic data that let them avoid enemy positions while simultaneously coordinating their movements in ways that human communication systems couldn't match. The child's empathic projections provided real-time updates on changing tactical situations, enemy responses, and the locations of other human units across the sector. "This is incredible," Torres said as they successfully flanked a Kithaeron position that had been pinning down another human squad. "It's like having perfect battlefield awareness. We know where everyone is, what they're planning, and how they're going to respond to our actions." The child's empathic response carried concepts of cooperation and mutual benefit, along with something that felt like hope for the first time since Alina had found them in the ruins. Through the telepathic link came knowledge that the child's people had been fighting the Kithaerons alone for generations, losing world after world, because they lacked the military coordination that human tactical training could provide. Alina's understanding of the war's broader implications shifted as she realized that the systematic elimination of telepathic species wasn't just genocide, but strategic preparation for conflicts against opponents who might develop the kind of hybrid coordination she and her unit were currently demonstrating. "The Kithaerons eliminate telepathic species because they can't counter this kind of tactical cooperation," Alina said, using the child's empathic projections to guide her unit around another enemy position. "They're built for fighting conventional opponents or isolated telepathic civilizations, but not hybrid forces that combine both approaches." The child's response carried concepts of ancient conflicts and strategic analysis that suggested their species had been studying Kithaeron tactics for much longer than Alina had assumed. Through the telepathic link came knowledge of other worlds where similar partnerships might be possible, other species who had survived Kithaeron attacks by adapting their telepathic abilities to work with non-telepathic allies. Alina's tactical assessment was interrupted when the child's empathic projections suddenly spiked with alarm and urgency. Through the mental network came warning of a massive Kithaeron force converging on their position, including heavy weapons platforms that could eliminate their entire unit regardless of telepathic coordination. "We've got bigger problems coming," Alina said, translating the urgency in the child's projections. "Looks like the Kithaerons have figured out we're coordinating telepathically, and they're bringing enough firepower to solve the problem permanently." Torres checked his ammunition and equipment with the kind of grim efficiency that suggested he'd been expecting this moment since the war started. Alina could sense through the telepathic network that her entire unit was preparing for what might be their final engagement, But the child's empathic projections carried something unexpected. Not despair, but determination mixed with what felt like a call for help. "The kid's doing something," Alina said, sensing massive changes in the telepathic network around them. "I think they're contacting other survivors of their species, coordinating some kind of response." Alina's proximity sensors registered multiple contacts approaching from various directions, but the child's empathic projections suggested these weren't additional Kitharan forces. Through the mental link came concepts of family, alliance, and the kind of desperate hope that characterized last stands that might not be as hopeless as they appeared. "I think," Alina said, feeling the telepathic network expand to include new participants whose presence felt both alien and somehow familiar, "we're about to find out what happens when humans and telepaths decide to fight a war together instead of separately." The child's empathic projection carried concepts of gratitude and trust, along with the knowledge that Alina's decision to risk everything for one small alien had somehow created the foundation for an alliance that might change the entire course of the conflict. The Kitharan assault force that crested the ridge looked like something from humanity's worst nightmares about mechanized warfare. 12 hunter-killers supported by heavy weapons platforms and enough ground troops to level a city. Alina's tactical assessment could be summarized as completely hopeless, with a side order of, "Why did I ever leave medical school?" "Doc," Torres said, checking his weapon one final time, "I hope your little friend has one more miracle in reserve, because we're about to need divine intervention from whatever God's telepathic species pray to." The child's empathic projections had shifted to patterns Alina had never experienced before, massive waves of communication that stretched far beyond their immediate position. Through the mental link came the sensation of dozens, then hundreds of telepathic minds joining the network, creating a coordination system that spanned the entire battlefield and beyond. "They're not just calling for help," Alina realized, feeling the scope of the telepathic network expanding beyond anything she'd imagined possible. "They're coordinating every surviving member of their species on this planet, plus every human unit that can establish mental contact." Alina's comm unit exploded with incoming transmissions as human forces across the sector began reporting impossible tactical coordination and battlefield awareness that exceeded anything their equipment could provide. Units that had been pinned down for hours suddenly found themselves able to coordinate complex flanking maneuvers, while isolated squads discovered they could navigate to safety through enemy positions they somehow knew how to avoid. "This is Alpha Base to all units," came the transmission that Alina had been hoping to hear since the war started. "We're registering coordinated movement from all human forces in the sector. Repeat, all units are moving with tactical coordination that exceeds our communication capabilities. Someone please explain what the hell is happening out there." Alina looked at the alien child, whose coloration had shifted to brilliant patterns that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the expanding telepathic network. Then at Torres, who was staring at his tactical display, with the expression of someone watching impossible things become routine. "Alpha Base, this is Medic 6, Alina said into her comm. "Be advised that we have successfully established telepathic coordination with indigenous-friendly forces. All human units in the network now have real-time battlefield awareness and tactical coordination capabilities." The silence that followed Alina's transmission lasted long enough for 3 more Kitharan hunter-killers to crest the ridge, bringing the total number of things trying to kill them to a level that Alina's medical training suggested was incompatible with continued survival. "Medic 6, came the eventual response from Alpha Base. "Did you just report that our forces are telepathically coordinated with aliens?" "Affirmative, Alpha Base," Alina said, using the child's empathic projections to track the approaching Kitharan forces with precision that made her targeting systems look like ancient history. "And unless I'm severely misreading the tactical situation. We're about to demonstrate why the Kitharans have been so interested in eliminating telepathic species. The first indication that the war had fundamentally changed came when human artillery strikes began landing with precision that suggested the gunners could see their targets through walls and across mountains. Alina realized that the expanded telepathic network wasn't just providing tactical information to individual units, but creating system-wide coordination that turned every human soldier into part of a larger organism. They can't counter this, Alina said, watching Kitharan forces struggle to respond to attacks they couldn't predict from positions they couldn't detect. Their entire military doctrine is based on fighting conventional opponents or isolated telepathic species. They've never encountered coordinated telepathic non-telepathic forces. The child's empathic projections carried concepts of vindication and hope mixed with what felt like species-wide relief, as their people finally found the allies they'd been seeking for generations. Through the telepathic network came knowledge that similar partnerships were forming on other worlds, other conflicts where human tactical training was combining with telepathic coordination to reverse the tide of Kitharan expansion.